This is the vlog for June 6th, and I'm going to start off by saying that I should know better in more than one sense of that statement. In this particular case, I should know better than trying to do a vlog when I'm angry or upset at something. That's not necessarily going to give the best performance, and these are performances as honest as they seem. I am very careful about what I am doing or saying, thinking very hard about what I do most of the time. But that's also sort of the subject of conversation tonight. I should know better than to ever try and bring something as controversial as Nazis up in conversation, especially when comparing different groups of people. You never make any friends saying somebody that is like a Nazi unless they're, very conservative, like really, really, let's not even go there. I shouldn't have gone there. I should have known that people often take things the wrong way. Even saying all this stuff, I can see people, especially the parties I've already offended, getting even more upset at me. And that's part of a thing where once you've upset someone, they're going to see everything you do as either trying to cover up your mistake or trying to pass it off as though it wasn't a mistake or whatever. And that's part of the problem, is that once you've managed to offend someone, in my experience, there's very little you can do to turn that perception, whatever that perception may be of you, around. I don't know what. So what had happened, and yes, I'm opening myself up yet again to being made to look quite foolish. But what had happened was there was some discussion about when J.K. Rowling admitted in a conversation that when she had written the character of Dumbledore, she had written him as homosexual. It had never come up in the books because he was at a point where personal romance was not a major concern in his life, but he believed strongly in the power of love to overcome adversity and difficult situations, and that love was in itself just a very powerful thing. I don't remember everything that transpired in this conversation, and keep in mind that this was over text on Discord, so I could go back and read a transcript of it, but I would rather not, because I'd rather not put any names out there. The chief complaint was it felt as though she had just sort of put that out there in order to placate complaints that none of the characters in her book had ever expressed being homosexual within the books. And the conversation had taken place after the last book had been published, so there were no more spoilers to worry about ruining. So she felt she could speak more openly. The idea that she should have included a more explicit same-sex pairing in some way over the course of her writing, and that she hadn't done that and then tried to sort of like, oh, actually, Dumbledore was gay and I just never told anyone. It felt dishonest or disingenuous. I took up the stance, or at least I was trying to explain, that it is impossible to make everyone happy, make every member of your audience happy. They're always going to find something they don't particularly like or actively dislike in your writing. And that while it's nice to try and make sure that every minority group under the sun is included, sometimes you don't want to include certain minority groups because of whatever particular reasons. And also it is up to the author to write as they feel they want to. Like, what's the point of writing if you can't write what you want? Well, I could go into detail about that, because when you are writing for an audience, you are trying to be very careful about what you write, and you're trying to make people happy. I could write whatever I want, and I did write what I wanted. But one of the reasons I haven't published yet is I'm aware that there are things I could change to improve it, broaden my audience. Yes, that means making more money, but I also just want to be a popular author. And, hopefully that's not a bad thing. Hopefully that doesn't seem greedy to want to be liked for something that you've put a lot of effort in. And I know when I frame it like that, it seems easy to take my side, but there are still people that are going to be like, writing for people shouldn't be about the author. The author's feelings shouldn't factor into the enjoyment of the work. But what I did was, when saying that there were certain ethnic groups that or not ethnic groups, but minority groups, social groups, that you didn't need to include in your story or try and, make them feel included in the story, I mentioned Nazis. I said there were no Nazis in the book I wrote, and I wasn't worried about, offending the Nazis. Who's ever worried about offending the Nazis? I then went on to point out that I haven't actually included any transgender characters in my book. Does that mean the transgender community is going to come and say, why didn't you include anybody that was transgender in your book? I actually have some plans to include characters of that nature in some other works if this first book took off. And there are characters in the first book who are gay or bisexual. And there's a chance that I'm going to have to remove references to that based on what a possible editor or publisher says, especially given that I'm sort of trying to target a younger audience, because young books targeted at young audiences often attract readers of older audiences anyways, if they don't feel they're being talked down to, while, writing a sort of R-rated book limits your audience in a much more impactful way. So my target audience is sort of the crowd in the, 16 and up category. I think they're, reasonably mature. If you can give them a 2-ton death machine to drive around in America, certainly they should be able to handle the idea that some people enjoy sexual preferences that are not considered normal. And I also mentioned that at one point, discussing one of the features of my book, a gentleman accused me of putting furries in the work. And now I'm forced to contend with, do I want to promote furries in the work? Would that be good for my broader audience appeal? Or would that limit a broader audience appeal? I don't think people are very fair to the furry community. I'm not terribly familiar with them, but they don't seem to be going out of their way to ruin anybody else's time. They just have something they enjoy, and I leave them to it. I don't understand it, but I don't have to understand it to let them enjoy it. And I feel that way about a lot of things. I don't like corn as a food, but I don't think that means other people should not eat corn. But I'm getting away from the point. I led in that discussion with Nazis. I said, I don't think I should be trying to placate Nazis by adding Nazis to my book. And someone believed that I was likening homosexuals to Nazis. Well, I don't think homosexuals are anything like Nazis, considering Nazis made it a personal point of theirs to try and exterminate homosexuals within Germany during the period of Nazi rule. I am forced to admit that in some respects they have similarities, in that they are currently both minority groups. There aren't more gay people than straight people, and there aren't more Nazis than other members of other political parties. So, technically they're both minorities. They are both maligned by majorities in some places, although I think Nazis are more universally maligned because they were a bunch of genocidal maniacs, whereas the homosexual community, to my knowledge, has never tried to wipe out any social groups at all, except maybe haters. And that's not in a violent way. That's more in a philosophical, don't be a hater kind of way. So none of that matters. Why doesn't any of that matter? Because once you come across as someone who sees something like that or says something like that, and people make up their mind that you are like that, there's almost nothing you can do to change that. I tried to be as rational in explaining that as I could, but I was simply told in no uncertain terms that I was never permitted to make any sort of association like that ever. Now, I had not intended to make an association like that at all. So I don't know that I did, except in that person's mind. But I just sat there and said, okay, because that's all you can do. It is the curse to be white and male in this country that I will spend most of my time saying I'm sorry many times for things that I either didn't do or didn't intend to do, but accidentally did anyway, which I think most people say they're sorry in that circumstance anyway, so that's not so bad. But yeah, being a white guy with a name who last name that has a Z in it, I've often been associated with, well, I mean, it's not fair to say that I don't have white privilege, because I do, because I'm white. I don't relish it. It's hard to understand exactly the position I'm in without having ever experienced it from any other, from a female position, from a non-white position, from a non-straight position, any number of different points of view that I will never be able to partake of. So I just have to say I'm sorry and hope that people understand I am not trying to ruin anybody's good time. I'm only trying to defend my choices as an author and at least make aware what other authors, especially established authors, have had to deal with, the questions they've had to ask themselves, the situations they've been put in. And I try and ask people to imagine just for a moment that it might be more difficult than it seems. I feel a little bit better, but I also feel like maybe I am trying to make something right and I just can't. And maybe I should just live with the unhappiness of that and get used to it. Anyway, I'm Eric Spornitz, and tomorrow will be better.